Right, it's 7 o'clock. Councillor Ball's in the building. So we'll start. Okay. Right, welcome to the Planning Committee on Wednesday, the 19th of July, 2023. The agenda in front of me, and we have any apologies for absences and substitutions. I know we have substitution for Councillor Mealy by Councillor Iqbal tonight. Any urgent matters? No. Declarations of interest? No. Minutes? There are none.
Fair enough.
On this occasion. Site visit attendance. Let me call them out so we're aware. Myself, Councillor Martin, Councillor Ball, Councillor Gallant, Councillor Gordon, Councillor Kelly, Councillor Khan, Councillor Coley, Councillor Mahmood, Councillor Padda, Councillor Raza, and Councillor Iqbal. Apologies from Councillor Wall were received. Okay. Thank you. Right. So tonight we have one speaker, Kim Holton, and we have the applicant speaking as well. So I'm going to push that. What?
Sorry, it's the other way around. The applicant is in the room. And
oh, sorry. Right. Okay. Right. Didn't realise that. Okay. So we have a virtual objector, and yeah. Anyway, we're moving that to the top of the agenda because we've got speakers. So just to let the members of the public know that's we're shifting the agenda slightly, and then we'll go back onto the agenda as printed. So, which is norm. So without further ado, shall we go to the planning application for 239 Horn Lane? That's you, Joel, I think. Yeah.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, members. I present to you this evening an application for planning permission involving the demolition of existing structures and construction of a mixed-use development comprising a building between 6 and 15 stories. The development would comprise a double-height ground floor with mezzanine to reaccommodate the existing builder's merchant with 185 residential units within 4 separate cores. All cores would be primarily accessed from a large podium garden area that would be accessed from Horn Lane. The development would provide for a mix of different types of housing comprising 8 studio units, 91 one-bedroom units, 74 two-bedroom units, and 12 three-bedroom units. Affordable housing provision would be secured at a rate of 35% by habitable room, with a 10-year split of 60-40 in favour of London affordable rent. The calculations for affordable housing are similar when calculated on a per unit and per floor space basis, as is outlined within the committee report. The application site forms part of a development site within both the current and draft local plans. The site therefore presents an opportunity to deliver additional housing in a location that has excellent public transport and access to local amenities. Under the current local plan, whilst the development site does not specifically mention the site is appropriate for tall buildings, the current designation does seek to provide for a high density development that optimises the development site's potential. Under the allocation within the draft local plan, the site mentions an indicative height of 18 stories as potentially appropriate. A townscape and visual impact assessment has been carried out, which shows that within the emerging built form of the area, the proposal would sit appropriately within its local context, offering a clear transition in building heights. The siting of the highest part of the development towards the northeast of the site also reinforces the importance of Acton Main Line as an important transport node along the Elizabeth Line. It is not considered there will be any impact on any surrounding designated heritage assets. The proposed development would also result in significant improvements to the streetscape. The existing site has a row of 5 vacant Class E units that are set significantly forward within the street, resulting in a narrowing of the footpath in this location and an incoherency in the established built form. The proposed development would rationalise the building line with the adjacent Acton House and provide additional public realm that will better humanise the Horn Lane frontage of the site. The residential access would provide for an interesting archway feature with staircase leading to the podium garden area. Separate lift access would also be provided for those with limited mobility. This would be an impressive design feature that will provide an inviting space for residents. The frontage of the proposed development also featured double height glazing to the builder's merchant, which would better engage the development with the street, particularly with respect to the existing situation as shown in that the image before here, whereby the existing warehouse structure is set into the application site. You also notice on the image on the right-hand side that the building height along Horn Lane would match that of Acton House as well. So we have a consistent building line and consistent height along Horn Lane. The quality of the proposed residential accommodation has been assessed and the proposal would comply with all relevant space standards. Some flats would be provided with deck access, which would have the function of providing additional dual aspect homes within the scheme. Since pre-application discussions, the width of the deck access has been increased to 2 meters and the windows and doors to these flats will be set in to provide additional defensible space within the deck access, between the deck access and the habitable rooms within each retrospective dwelling, which can sort of be seen in the image on below. An important consideration for this application is the agent of change, whereby the responsibility of mitigating the impacts of development falls on the more noise-sensitive use. In this case, the residential uses within the proposed development. Development site designation seeks to protect the industrial activities on the northern side of the railway, and through the course of the application, extensive discussions have occurred between the council, the applicant, DB Cargo, Quattro, and Network Rail. This has resulted in a revised noise assessment being submitted, and subject to the recommended conditions, all relevant parties have withdrawn their objections to the proposed scheme. It is considered that subject to compliance with these conditions, future residents would be provided with a good standard of living and industrial activities nearby would remain unimpeded. Communal amenity spaces within the development would be of a high quality that would provide for opportunities for recreation within the proposed development. Aside from the large podium area, rooftops will be maximised where possible with green roofs to provide for additional amenity space and urban greening. There is a small shortfall in communal amenity space, which would be secured through financial contribution, and the development would provide for a compliant amount of children's play space with further details to be secured through planning condition. The proposal has been assessed against relevant planning policy and responses have been received from both TfL and Council's Transport Planning Officer. Compliant levels of cycle parking are provided that comply with London Cycle Design Standards. No residential parking is proposed, so it's accordingly a car-free development, aside from the disabled parking spaces at 3%. And future residents would, of course, be restricted from applying for parking permits within the area. There is a small uplift in the number of commercial spaces. However, it is considered that this is well justified given the bulky goods nature of the builder's merchant use. Separate spaces have been provided for the residential and commercial deliveries and servicing, and swept paths have been provided which show that vehicles would be able to effectively maneuver within the site. Members should also be aware of an application that has been made to the Secretary of State for a Transport and Works Act order for Network Rail to occupy the site temporarily in conjunction with works at the as under construction Old Oak Common Station. The applicant has objected to this TWAO and will likely go to a public inquiry. Nevertheless, members are advised that this existing TWAO application has no bearing on the ability of council to determine this application. However, to be pragmatic, council officers are recommending a 5-year implementation period and the possibility of a phasing plan should the Secretary of State give approval for the TWAO. This would ensure that potentially Network Rail and the applicant could both deliver their respective proposals for the site. And it should be advised that the applicant has reiterated that they fully intend to deliver this scheme. And based on the amended recommendations in the briefing note as well, Network Rail have removed their objection to the proposed development. Members should also be aware of the briefing note, which contains an amended recommendation this evening for the proposed development. The response from HSE, the Health and Safety Executive, has been received, which advises that there are no land use planning considerations relating to fire safety or building regulations. Through the application process, the scheme has also been revised to provide a second staircase where necessary in accordance with GLA requirements. Accordingly, there are no fire safety concerns with respect to the proposed development. Accordingly, the officer recommendation is that the application be granted subject to conditions, legal agreement, and stage 2 referral to the GLA. And I'll refer the members back to the briefing note as well, which outlines that amended recommendation and additional representation that was received and the amended conditions. Thank you.
Thanks, Joel. Okay, right. We have as an objector, we have Emma Boyling, who is online. Jack, I know you've told Emma that she has 3 minutes, and we will send a reminder at 30 seconds.
Great, thank you. Good evening.
Hold on a second, Emma. Just
Sorry.
I'll let you know. We're looking for some technical. Right, we've got you on screen now. So, right,
Perfect.
you ready, Jack? Right, away you go. Then, Emma, please.
Good evening, Chair and members. I appreciate the need for housing in London at present. However, we have the following 5 key objections to this proposal. Number 1, local services. It's already been noted in respect to this application that there is insufficient community facilities in the local area, with pressures from other developments of Friary Road, North Acton Towers and Acton Gardens. The investment is simply not happening quickly enough to relieve the pressure. Existing local supermarkets are frequently experiencing high queues of people during peak times with lack of available sites for further supermarkets to support the demand. Secondly, local infrastructure is already overloaded. It was noted in the community review panel on the 26th of September in 2022. There's been frequent flooding and burst mains on the west side of Horn Lane from Sainsbury's down to Julian Avenue. Surely more housing will only increase the pressure on our water infrastructure. I also query what's been done to increase the grid capacity and resilience in Ealing to provide for such a development, and the electric vehicles a sustainable development like this is looking to encourage. As recently as late last year, we heard from the GLA and Ealing Council on concerns regarding the grid capacity in the area. The height of the development is high and represents a migration of the tall overdeveloped towers from North Acton to south of the A40, which is changing the community skyline from low rise residential to a tower borough. Fourthly, safety. Highway safety is a concern, with 2 high volume access points in close proximity being the Horn Lane car wash, with pedestrian crossing between that and this existing site. Combined with the logistic residential needs will only increase the volumes at the proposed site and risk to pedestrians. And finally, transport. As another member objecting on the public comments on this application, there is a huge pressure on Crossrail at present, with sometimes an inability to board trains, even since the May 2023 service increase. Whilst this is a cross-London network issue, the local developments of Friary Park scheme and this development, as well as the compounding effect of Heathrow traffic increase and return to work strategies by employers, will only increase these issues going forwards. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Emma. That was well within the time. Thank you. Right, for the applicant, we have Tim Holtham. Again, 3 minutes. We will let you know when you're 30 seconds out from the 3 minutes. Okay.
Good evening, Chair, members of the Planning Committee. My name is Tim Holtham and I'm a director at DP9, the project's planning consultants, and I'm speaking on behalf of the applicant this evening. I'm conscious of your time, so I'll keep this brief, but the team is on hand to answer any questions you may have. We'd like to thank the officers for their hard work over the last 15 months in assisting the team in bringing this application forwards. We'd also like to thank the design review panel and the community review panel for their input during the pre-application process. We're extremely pleased to receive the officer's recommendation to grant permission, and we hope that members will be minded to follow that recommendation this evening. The site is envisaged in current adopted planning policy and in the council's emerging draft local plan is an ideal site for mixed-use development. Our approach has been guided by both current policy and the principles established in the early stages of the council developing their new local plan. The proposals are compliant with the site allocations guiding redevelopment of the site in both the current and the draft local plan. The proposal will ensure this brownfield site, situated immediately next door to a local train station, is brought into optimal use in the future. Importantly, the proposal will deliver new homes and a high proportion, fast-track compliant amount of affordable homes. We have engaged positively and reassured the businesses to the north of the railway tracks that the new homes will be compatible with the local environment. The site will also allow the continued presence of a replacement builders merchant on the site, retaining employment and an essential service to the local community. The proposals have been designed to ensure that the different uses can sit comfortably side by side. The proposal responds not only to the council's desire to see employment use retained and improved, but guarantees the long-term future of an existing use that remains valuable to the people who live and work locally. Such uses are increasingly being squeezed out by emerging developments across London. Thank you for your time, and again, both myself and the wider team are available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Tim. Again, well within the time. Thank you very much for that. Okay, right. Joel, do you want to respond to anything that's been said by applicant or the objector?
I'll respond to a few of Ms. Boyling's comments. In terms of local services, there are, a number of retail type activities in the area. I can't attest to the volume of supermarkets and things and their capacity, having not experienced that myself. But obviously there are supermarkets within the local area, and there's obviously a transition towards online grocery shopping as well. So that will inevitably be part of the behaviour of the residents going forward. In terms of flooding, we have had some discussions with the GLA who have some concerns about their proposal, but this will effectively be addressed through condition and further details on the rainwater harvesting to mitigate any surface water runoff onto Horn Lane. I think the height of the development I've already addressed within the officer report and within talking to you tonight. In terms of highway safety, yes, although I would probably say that it would be an improved situation as the narrowing of the footpath effectively creates a blind spot at that access point right now. So moving that back will increase visibility, and by condition, the applicant is also required to submit a road safety audit for the new crossover there. With respect to transport, I would have to refer that to TfL. That would be TfL's responsibility in terms of increasing capacity for that railway station. However, anecdotally, I can't attest for all times of the day, but there are times of the day when it's not over congested or anything like that.
Thanks, Joel. Joel. There's a Joel and a Joel in the room. That's why. Sorry. Apologies. Right. Okay. So I'll open it up to the committee for questions. Please bunch your questions together. And if there's a lot, we're not coming back again, by the way. So Councillor Martin, Councillor Gallant, Councillor Ball.
Can you hear me on that?
Yeah.
Okay. So actually, one question, which is based on what Joel just mentioned about deliveries to home for shopping, etc. So I'm just wondering what the access to the development will be. I know there's going to be some gates, aren't there? And I think they were going to be closed at night, and just wondering how that's going to be managed. Do we know how that's going to be managed? And also what the pedestrian route is into the site. So that's one question. Another question was, there's 2 pages of impact on windows. And I think they seem to range from relatively low impact to quite high impact. And I just wondered how normal that was, and if any of them were sort of out of the norm. And my final one was in relation to the fact that we've suggested that we extend the planning permission horizon to 5 years. Can we just accept that as part of accepting this, writing this permission, or do we need to do something else to just make sure that that's understood, that it's changed to 5?
Depending on how many Councillor Gallant and Councillor Ball I'll come back to you, Joel, at some point. Councillor Gallant.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question about gates, but that's been asked already. That's fine. The other question I had, it's a mixed use development, industrial use, heavy industrial use, and residential. Can you give us some diagrammatic explanation of how traffic will work on sites?
Okay, right, Councillor Ball.
Yeah, I see condition 42 relating to the details of the operation of the commercial use, but just I wonder how realistic is it to have forklift movements and heavy heavy goods deliveries to a builder's merchant right underneath residential. And is this a condition that can be sensibly met? And I was going to ask a question about I think Councillor Martin really covered it on the effect on the windows of the various blocks. But I suppose, yeah, I suppose the thing is what the worst affected units. I mean, essentially what this, so this is, I'm looking at pages 36, 37. The table is going through and saying kind of the effect on most of the units isn't too bad, but there are some which it's, so there's like 4 units in Acton House, for instance, which are below 50% target. I mean, so how badly affected are the worst affected houses? Thanks.
Sorry, is that in relation to light? Yeah.
Okay, let's take that group of questions, Joel, and carry on.
Sure. So on the proposed plans, there's obviously an access route down the side. It will be gated. Part of that is to prevent residents parking within the commercial spaces. Part of it's also to secure that after hours. Now, how that will effectively work will need to be secured by condition because that can't be known at this stage. But a few measures have been implemented, including setting the gate significantly back into the plot to ensure that the largest vehicles that will access that site will be able to park off the highway, not hang over onto the pedestrian footpath. There are elements of the scheme. There will be a concierge room to the front. So I imagine what will happen, we'll need to secure details on this, but there will be some form of intercom situation when vehicles arrive for resident or commercial deliveries after hours, who will be able to speak to the on-site manager of the development. Yeah, but again, those details can't be known at this stage, but and how that will effectively operate. But we're genuinely satisfied at the current time that there is adequate detail available to be able to make the recommendation that this is acceptable at this stage. There's been Councillor Ball and Councillor Martin have both sort of referred to the windows. So when we're looking at BRE guidance, when something doesn't comply, that doesn't mean it's necessarily unacceptable. It just means it will be noticeable. Now, with this site, obviously it has a very low level of development currently, and therefore any development of the site will have proportionate increases that are larger than what you would experience on other sites. So it's just the nature of the site currently that the reduction in light seems like a lot, but the retained level of light is still acceptable. So the reductions are showing a significant reduction, but the retained level of light is generally acceptable. In terms of the requirement for 5 years, this refers to implementation. This doesn't obviously refer to completion. The Town and Country Planning Act does allow us to determine the timeframe for implementation, and this is a unique situation where we are having to respond to the Transport and Works Act order to ensure that the scheme can be delivered. So we wouldn't ordinarily do this. We only do this in certain circumstances, but the Town and Country Planning Act does allow us to name a specific timeframe.
And that's part of what we're decided tonight. That will be decided.
Yes.
Correct.
Yes, Chair. The condition 1 has amended the time limit to reflect that 5-year period.
Onto Councillor Gallant's questions. So from the site visit, you might notice that currently there's lots of forklifts driving around the area currently, and that's because a lot of these materials are currently stored outside the building. Now, obviously, with the level of development that's proposed, this would all be occurring internally. So that's why we are having a 6-metre floor-to-ceiling height for that space, so there can be stacking of materials and forklifts would move internally. Now, there are requirements through conditions that sound insulation between the residents and the commercial will be effectively mitigating that impact. So we're relatively confident, we're certainly confident that the condition that's been recommended would address that particular matter. In terms of a diagrammatic explanation, I'd have to refer you to the report figure. Sorry, excuse me for a second.
That's okay. It's fine.
Figure number 25 within the report.
What page?
I've got page 45. So on that particular plan, it is showing 3 separate areas. One, obviously one that's referred to as commercial loading bay, which is located to the northeast, is obviously for the bulk deliveries to the particular site. The builder's merchant loading bay would probably be for operational matters, so deliveries and things like that. And the residential loading bay is also separate. So the swept path analyses do show that these can all work independently. There is a slight concern about how this will all work together, how we'll ensure that, you know, deliveries will be occurring at certain times. And that's why we need a final delivery and servicing strategy as part of the condition. So those loading bays do work very well independently. How they'll work together will need to be demonstrated by condition. And the condition 42 is.
Joel, are you able to actually share your report on screen? Just because I think the diagram on page, sorry,
Yes.
25 would be
I
really
should be able
helpful,
to.
and it would be useful if we could just quickly run through all the individual elements of the proposal.
Bear with me a second.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Can slightly zoom in there, maybe. Maybe I zoomed in too far.
That's it.
So we have the three, sorry, this one here. So we have a commercial loading bay in the northeastern corner there, obviously for the bulk delivery of, you know, large bits of timber and things like that, whereas the operational matters will be referred to where the building merchant loading bay is. So if anyone's ordered any deliveries for any construction sites, this is where that would occur. And obviously the location of that is located close to the actual rear of the commercial, the builder's merchant site. The residential loading bay would be located over here to the side. And that will obviously, as you can see with this gate here, it is set back in there. So as larger vehicles come in here and need access, they will be able to not impede the footpath. So all these swept path analyses work, as I mentioned, but how they'll work together will need to be secured by condition.
Just Joel, just while you've got the image on the screen, I think it's important just to draw the members' attention to what happens alongside the vehicle access as you enter into the site. I think you can just make out in this diagram that there is a pedestrian pathway that runs alongside the building footprint, and you can see some gates as well. It's quite faint, but can you just confirm that that's the case?
So that's here. This would be where the access is, pedestrian access. So that currently, as you would have noticed on the site when you went there on the weekend, that it's quite quite a hostile environment. There is no separation between vehicles and pedestrians. This would formalize that arrangement and significantly improve the situation.
Oh, yeah, we actually fell foul of it on Saturday morning.
Indeed.
We did actually go onto the site without high-vis and high-vis, etc. So, yeah. So there is a separation between pedestrian and vehicles.
Correct. Yeah. However,
a pavement, or is it the same level? Do we know that detail?
We don't know that detail just yet. However, there are conditions requiring details of the road surfaces and their layouts. But it should be noted that the pedestrians will majority be using the archway at the front of the site. That's the primary access for residents. Only in emergencies would they be using around the back.
So do you want to point the archway out there?
So that's located here.
Where? Oh, there. Right. Okay.
Yeah. So the two uses are completely separate of each other.
Okay. Right. Were your questions answered satisfactorily? Thank you. Councillor Coley, you've indicated. So before you, anyone else indicating? Right, Councillor Coley, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little bit concerned about the noise pollution, which is going to be obviously right next to the railway line, and plus we've got a builder's merchant downstairs. I couldn't quite pick it up from the report, but have we suggested mechanical ventilation for each of the flats? Because the minute you open your windows up, doesn't matter how well insulated the building envelope is, obviously there's a lot of noise pollution to be concerned about. Thank you.
Any other questions? Right, I'll take that as the last question. Joel?
That's correct. The applicant will be required to submit a ventilation strategy. Obviously, one side of the building will be better than the other. So the inlet for this ventilation will need to probably be on the Horn Lane side or in a side that's not as exposed to poor air quality. But all flats would have mechanical ventilation built into them. Yes.
Okay, I think that's all the questions. Right, we're now going to open up for debate. Councillor Kelly.
Yeah, some of the questions were quite useful today. And I did have sort of concerns about the nature of the site and sort of, careful with my words, sort of the legitimacy of having a builder's yard there amongst what's been developed, but I've been given sort of quite reassurance, and it's sort of been rebutted. So it's no longer going to be a builder's yard; it's going to be a builder's warehouse to use. I think that's really important. So when we went there, it's a lot of development on a small parcel of land. There's no getting away from that, because if you compare the other two applications coming in front of us, it just is. But it speaks to its location, beside the station, Elizabeth Line, etc. And this is what has been planned for the area. So it's good. It's a bit of a reset, because there is they're reintroducing, re-establishing an existing business there, and housing. So I would be, I'm very pleased with the application, and I'd be minded to grant. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Kelly. Councillor Ball.
Yeah, so I think the principle of mixed-use development on the site is acceptable. I still have a bit of a concern about noise from the builders merchants to sort of residents, because I mean, when we looked at the delivery arrangements, and so you've got the bulk deliveries happening at one corner of the site, and then so the large goods that have been dropped off there would need to be forklift moved into the inside of the builders merchant. So there are going to be those movements of large amounts of noisy things. But I think the bigger point really is the height of the largest elements, because you're in an area which is predominantly either low-rise flats or Victorian houses. And so I think, the 6-story element, fine. Maybe you go a bit higher than that, but I think the 15 stories is a lot higher. I mean, the current situation you've got is the objector pointed out, the A40 is effectively a dividing line between the tall buildings around North Acton Station and the much lower height development to the south. So it seems to me that 15 stories is excessive for this site. So I'm minded to vote against.
Councillor Ball, I must point out Furry Park, which is south side of the A40, has tall buildings on it. So A40 isn't the dividing line between tall buildings or not. Just to make you aware of that. Councillor Gallant.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for explaining about the vision for the movement of traffic there. I have to say I'm because of the uncertainties which you've also been very clear about. I'm not convinced that the dual usage is appropriate, and I'm not convinced that it will run smoothly at all at the moment. And as Councillor Ball says, I'd mirror that, and I'd mirror the words of the objector as well, that the height of the 15-story height is too tall, and it does, as she elegantly says, it represents a height migration south of the A40, and I'm also minded to vote against this application.
Okay. Right. Anyone else? Councillor Gordon.
Just following on from those two comments, when we went on the site visit, I was struggling to reconcile the dual use, which Councillor Kelly referred to, but I think we've had good explanations, and I think the site has been well worked out. I'm very much happy to remove the industrial buildings or the commercial buildings on Horn Lane, which are a bit of an eyesore. And I'm very much welcome the fact that the block next to Acton House is going to be in keeping, and that the higher blocks will be recessed on the railway line. So sort of challenging my two colleagues here who've mentioned the height being too big. It won't be. I mean, it's going to be quite appropriate backing onto the railway line. So with all the caveats of just ironing out the deliveries and how we're going to manage that, which I'm sure the planning officers can support, I'd be very much minded to support the application.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? I quite echo Councillor Gordon's views on this. I would thought one day most movements are electric vehicles anyway, and noise would probably only through reversing bleeps, which would probably be absolutely overridden by trains going past and traffic going past. So I would have thought it's minor, the amount of movements from forklift trucks to warrant a refusal of this. Okay, right. I shall go to the vote, as I'm not seeing any other people, members showing to debate this. So, right, all those in favour of this application, please show. All those against? Any abstentions, just for clarity? Right, okay, thank you very much. The application was granted. Okay, we move back onto the agenda for tonight. So the next one we have is Smith's Farm, Kensington Road. That's yours, John, isn't it? It is. Right, okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Anyone in the gallery, if they want to leave now, that's fine. Okay.
Right, right,
Right. Okay.
Chair. Right, so, go to the box. Put me a bottle of water.
Sorry? Right, okay. Okay, sorry, John, are you ready? Right. Oh,
And I couldn't just use the bathroom there.
yes, of course, yeah.
Thank you.
2 minutes. Councillor Coley, right, 3 minutes then. Right. Can you hold on, John?
Sure.
Because I need him back in the room. You
Thank you,
sneak
Chair.
back
Thank
in
you.
without me noticing. Right, okay. All right, councillor Roberts, sorry, John, would you like to introduce this item, please?
Thank you. This application is for a mainly residential development of a previously developed industrial site within the Greenbelt. This is a site just south of the A40 between North Allowfields and Smith Farm Fields with a residential
John,
area.
hold on a second. Got a bit of feedback into the room somehow. Is it your, oh, well, Joel used that mic, so.
Yeah.
We'll just have to grin and bear it, okay?
Okay. So this is a site just south of the A40 between North Allowfields Mounds and Smith Farm Fields to the east, and with a residential area to the south of it. It's an untidy site containing an old farmhouse and barns, but mainly old industrial buildings, temporary structures, and extensive hard standing. Current uses include car sales, a lorry park and storage of plant and construction equipment. And this is a view from Horseshoe Crescent showing the parked cars and an attractive boundary wall. The site lies on the Greenbelt with more open Greenbelt land to the north, east and west, all public open space and including a site of importance for nature conservation. The farmhouse and barns on the site are locally listed. And it's important to note that this site is allocated for residential-led development in the emerging local plan. The proposal is for redevelopment to provide 220 dwellings in 7 blocks of 4 to 7 stories. And here are the main elements of the scheme: 220 flats, of which 111 are affordable, cafe and commercial use of the locally listed buildings, a large central communal area, and a landscaped cycle pedestrian route through the site. And this slide shows the general concept of the development. So it shows the central parkland communal area here, the blocks of flats surrounding it, these listed farmhouse and barns at the center of the site retained as a cafe. I sent this cycle pedestrian route leading through the site, linking North Allowfields and Smith Farm Fields, and the car parking kept to the sides to the north and the south, 2 separate entrances to that to separate it from the residential development and keep them away from the flats. There's also going to be planting of 150 new trees, so extensive landscaping around and within the site. And here's the proposed site plan showing the general amount and landscaping and green space proposed. Now, this proposal would be an appropriate development in the Greenbelt. However, this is a brownfield site allocated for residential-led development and emerging local plan, and the council has previously resolved to approve residential development on it. In any event, we consider very special circumstances apply, which in balance are considered to outweigh any harm to the Greenbelt. And these are listed here. So the fact that it's been allocated for residential use, previously been approved without actually issuing a permission for housing development. It would remove an untidy, contaminated brownfield site in the Greenbelt, provide 111 affordable flats, 109 market flats with many family-sized units, refurbishment of the locally listed buildings for a cafe, provision of a landscape route between the 2 open space areas on either side of the site, improvements to the adjoining open space, and a biodiversity net gain on what's a pretty much industrial brownfield site. So in combination, we feel these factors are enough to justify or override any adverse impacts on the Greenbelt. There would be a loss of employment land from the site, but much of the site is actually used for car sales rather than industrial uses. And there has been adequate justification for the loss of industrial land provided in terms of a market report and information about how attractive it is and whether it could be the buildings could be viably refurbished and reused. So given that we have accepted residential development on the site in the past, we don't think the loss of employment land is much of an issue. We don't think the development would have any unacceptable impacts on adjoining residential properties, mainly because of the separation distances to most of the surrounding dwellings, some of which are 40 to 50 meters away. And there are no objections from nearby occupiers in terms of amenity impacts. This scheme would make an important contribution to local housing provision and meeting housing needs. Over half of all the residential units would be affordable, with a policy compliant 10-year split of 60% London affordable rent and 40% shared ownership. Over 60% of flats would be larger family size units. The London affordable rent units will be in two separate blocks, blocks A and D, and over half of these would be larger 2 and 3 bedroom units. And overall, we feel the environmental conditions of these flats and living conditions are adequate in terms of floor space, layout, daylight, and visual outlook. All the flats would have balconies to London plan standards, and a large landscape central park would be provided within the site to give adequate communal amenity space. This is a slide that shows what it would look like. There would be a shortfall in play space for older children, but that would be mitigated by Section 106 contribution to offsite provision with a play area nearby Northala Fields. And the landscape cycle pedestrian route through the site would give improved public access between Northala Fields and Marlin Fields with a new pedestrian crossing in Kensington Road. The design of the scheme results from extensive pre-application discussion with planning officers and the GLA and the design review panel. While the current scheme contains more dwellings and higher buildings than the scheme reviewed last year, its design, layout, and extensive provision of landscaped open space are considered far superior and more suited to its greenbelt surroundings. And we feel the scheme also has much more variation in its heights of buildings and roofscape and in its materials to make it a much more attractive scheme. Now, some elements of the scheme are 7 stories in height, and that could be considered as tall buildings on a site not identified for this in the development plan. However, we have assessed it against the London Plan Policy D9 tall buildings design criteria, and we think it complies to a reasonable extent. In any event, as you can see from the slide, most of the buildings are actually 4 to 5 stories in height. There's only 2 blocks at the northeast and southeast corners, which actually go up to 7 stories. We've also had confirmation today from the Health and Safety Executive that they have no issues with the buildings in terms of fire safety. We've considered whether there be any adverse visual impacts on nearby open land. These are views from the west, from the Northala Fields mounds, showing existing view, which is already quite a lot of built development in it, the car parks and an untidy site with older buildings, and the view with the new development on it, showing the long distance views are initially preserved and the landscaping softens the scheme. Looking from the east, from Smith's Farm Fields, there would be an impact. You can definitely see these buildings showing above the trees, but we don't think it's an unacceptable impact overall. It's also not considered that the scheme would have any significant harm to nearby heritage assets. The conservation areas nearby are quite some distance away, and the locally listed barns and farmhouse are shown on this slide. would be preserved and with a long-term viable use in them. And we consider overall that the benefits of the scheme outweigh any impacts on the heritage assets. In terms of traffic impacts, these are estimated to actually to be less from the scheme than from the existing use, which contains quite a lot of heavy vehicles. Transport services consider the development acceptable, subject to conditions and financial contributions towards review of parking restrictions and a potential CPZ here. Raised tables at the site entrance junction, accident remediation measures, bus stop improvements, and works to improve local pedestrian and cycle infrastructure. Section 106 contributions have been agreed for such measures. And along with potential parking restrictions on nearby roads and provision of car club membership to scheme residents, impacts arising from the proposal should be satisfactorily mitigated. Just looking at accessibility of the site, because it has quite a low PTAL level, its accessibility to Northolt Town Centre will be improved by a large contribution to local bus services, to improving local bus stops, contribution to improvements to Northolt Station to make it step-free, and there are highway plans for a new cycle route running past the site. I would add that the applicant has since agreed £330,000 of further Section 106 contributions, which aren't mentioned in the committee report, for improvement to bus services and to improvements to Northolt Station. So that adds to the quite substantial transport infrastructure improvements already proposed. There are also various measures to enhance the value of the site for wildlife and achieve biodiversity gain. 115 new trees being planted, enhancing what's currently an untidy site covered in hard-standing, poor quality buildings and many parked vehicles. So overall, the scheme will provide a number of planning benefits: large increase in the housing stock, 111 affordable flats, improving an unsightly contaminated brownfield site in the Greenbelt, improved public access between North Allowfields and Marnham Fields, 115 new trees, long-term viable use for locally listed buildings, a cafe for the local community and visitors to North Allowfields, and there'll also be some £303 million in Section 106 and sewer contributions for infrastructure, community facilities, and open space improvements. So these benefits in combination are considered to outweigh any harm to the Greenbelt and any adverse impacts of the scheme. And as such, it's recommended for conditional approval, subject to Section 106 and Section 278 legal agreements. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Right, we have a whole host of questions. I'm going from left to right. Right, keep your hands up. Councillor Kelly, kick off, please.
Yeah, thank you, John, for your presentation. Wouldn't mind understanding a bit more about what contamination might mean, and why we perhaps don't have a bit more knowledge of that now. Is it just dirt from what's there? Bit more understanding around the CPZ. There are particular parking challenges there now, and the developer's quite rightly going to give some money towards CPZ contribution. But when might that be? Would that be after the development? Because if you've done a CPZ consultation now, it simply wouldn't be meaningful because you don't have the extra parking. So if I could gain a bit more understanding over that. The three and bit more understanding of the £330,000, which is welcome, but it doesn't buy you a new bus route. It buys you some tidied up bus shelters, a bit of extraneous stuff, and when on the site, I won't say objective, but I did rebut some people saying about it being quite not a great location in terms for transport, but it is very close to Northolt Station. It's a very short walk. So my question is it when you're talking about the town centre, do you mean Northolt village, town centre, even though for me it doesn't really qualify as a town centre? Or do you mean Greenford Broadway, or do you mean the top of Lady Margaret Road? Because it's close to all of these places. So a bit of ring fencing of where Northolt Town Centre is. And I think that's it. Thank you.
Sorry, right. Next, Councillor Gallant.
I have questions on contamination and parking, and that's going to be answered.
Thank you very much. And I'll ask anyone that if their questions have already been asked, don't ask them again, okay? Councillor Gordon.
It's a very short question. It was relating to the planning application that was refused last year, which is now to Peel. And I just wanted some clarity as what the implication would be if the Peel is successful. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Ball. Hold on, John. I'll bring you in after Councillor Ball, I think.
Yeah, my question is about the 2022 refusal as well, but it's a different question. I mean, what's the key difference between this scheme and the refused scheme, which was refused as inappropriate development in the green belt and overdevelopment, and was actually slightly smaller in terms of units and height than this one?
Right. If you can address those, John, and we'll bring two more indications so far. So, yeah.
Righto. In terms of contamination, I don't know what the particular types of contamination on the site. I mean, it's had a long history of industrial uses, of vehicle repairs, storage of cars and construction equipment, car sales. So I'd have thought there's all sorts of oils and other contaminants on the site. But we do have conditions for remediation of that. And there's no, it's similar to all other contaminated sites, and there's no reason to think these can't be adequately dealt with before it's made suitable for housing development. Obviously, we've had the views of our contamination officer on that, and they seem happy with it. In terms of the CPZ, we've got a condition on, I think it's part of the section of the legal agreement, to provide money to investigate parking restrictions, which could involve a potential CPZ there. There has been some work done on the transport statement to look at the existing parking provision. I'd have thought it's obviously going to take a few months before planning permission is actually granted on this and other conditions are dealt with. But I thought some of the work, preliminary work on investigation for a CPZ could start fairly soon after the planning permission is granted, at least the investigation about the need for it. Obviously, the amount of traffic from the scheme is known, it's in the transport statement. Existing capacity in the area has been looked at. So I'd have thought some of that work could be done fairly quickly. In terms of the Section 106 contributions and what they're going to be used for, there's a number of them. The two most recent ones, the 221,000 towards improvement of bus services that TfL asked for, that is actually to improve bus services, which means I think more frequency of buses. There's a separate 100,000 for improvement of bus stops in the committee report. So these are two different issues, but it should improve the frequency of buses. I think at the moment, the E10 is already a 15-minute frequency during the daytime, during the week. And so that could be improved. The other contributions is one towards improving Northolt Station, and there are contributions towards improvements to Northolt Town Centre. I'm not sure that's been defined that well about regeneration, but it could be defined to include Northolt Village and the station, that area, and improvements, various improvements towards these. They haven't actually been specified apart from the ones to the station at the moment. Just moving on to the review scheme.
Sorry, I just want to, did you want to come back, Councillor Kelly, on any of those? Because you were looking a bit perplexed at the first one, I think.
It's
second one.
It's the yeah, thank you for the remediation.
Yeah.
Say anything, you won't let it go ahead if you find something that you didn't expect to find. not going to say my inbox is full because it's one of them flabby phrases that people chuck out there, but I've got an estate quite close by, not the Cis Farm Fair, a different estate close by, where it was built, and now there's real parking pressures, and opposite there's Rectory Park, real parking pressures, and they're both relatively new estates built the last 15 years, and they've got real parking challenges, and I don't see anything there that dictates the direction. I don't understand it. What we might do is CPZ, we're going to give the money to highways, but I just want something more. I'm not sure what the developers can do, because they say, there's the money, you get on with it. But I don't see what's on the horizon there, except for another estate with the parking challenges. I mean, North Haller Fields has had its car parks expanded recently. That's been helpful, but there's real challenges around the existing parking in the area.
I think Alex might jump in here, and she's indicating with the green light flashing, now red.
Seen that before, thank you. I just wanted to clear up a little bit on the CPZ contribution. So committee are used to seeing recommendations which secure a contribution towards normally a consultation for a CPZ. So there's no guarantee in any of this that a CPZ will proceed. That will depend on the consultation. And we also don't specify when that will take place. So we can influence when that takes place. And obviously, you made a comment, Councillor Kelly, around, you know, it might need to be a bit later, for example, to understand the parking pressures, etc. So, and that can happen several times as well, because there may well be other developments that are also securing a contribution towards the CPZ consultation. So I hope that kind of clarifies that point. We must remember that we are looking at the impacts of the development on parking. Certain assessments have obviously been undertaken, and that also secures, in terms of the on-site parking, the right level, and it's you know, it needs to be quite carefully balanced as well, because at the same time we want to minimize the car parking as well. So we need to kind of understand that. So I don't think there's ever a clear answer to that, but there's also other things that can obviously happen outside of the planning process that can look at you know, improving the parking situation. And we must remember that, you know, that there are those other functions to look at that. I think the good thing around this particular proposal, as John has mentioned, is the additional contributions towards those enhanced bus services, etc., to try and discourage the parking pressures in the local area. And I think the other comment I was just going to pick up on the town centre improvements, the way that money can be allocated in section 106 can be further defined to give you some assurance. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. I hope that cleared that up. Right, right, John, Councillor Gordon's question around the appeal.
Yes, well, the scheme that was refused in last December has gone to appeal. Our understanding is that if this current application is given a positive decision by the committee, that appeal will be withdrawn. Was that the question you're asking? Yeah, yeah. On the other question about the key differences between the refused scheme and the current scheme, a lot of the refusal reasons for the last scheme were just because they didn't provide a lot of information that was required. But I think the main one was the scheme was very different. It was a much denser development, even though it had fewer units. Its general layout was much denser. It seemed to have much less open space and landscaping within the site, and in more parking. And it was also a scheme that seemed to be developed around car parking in the center of the site, almost with the housing as an afterthought to that. Seemed overall, it didn't seem like a a scheme that should be in this green belt location. It was very much a dense urban scheme. I think that was one of the main reasons why it was refused, and why the scheme is much better, with much more open space and landscaping, and a much less dense appearance and overall impression.
Councillor Ball is making faces, so I'm presuming he's going to come back.
Yeah, Chair. I'm just struggling a bit with how it can be denser. How the previous scheme was denser, but with fewer units. I mean, just I don't quite understand how that's possible.
Well, the current scheme has slightly higher buildings, which in itself should allow you to reduce the amount of built footprint. So you can get more buildings on the site without taking up so much of the green space. And that was the reason. But it was more about the layout and the way it was designed. I mean, there are ways of designing a scheme so it appears less dense, even though you can get more units in it. And we think that's what's been done here.
You're not having another go. That's it. And should we call them homes rather than units? Might be more closer to the mark. From both the officers and the committee, please.
Yeah.
Okay, so right, you've heard you go. So, Councillor Padder.
Thank you, Chair. I had two questions, both being answered. One was from Councillor Kelly, and the other one was a presentation about the play space for all the children.
Thank you. Councillor Mahmood.
Yeah, just thank you, Chair. Just three clarifications from you. As you said, this is designated metropolitan open land and green belt, and you said some special circumstances. I just wanted to know more about special circumstances. One. Second is, I just wanted to know the future of this heritage asset. You mentioned that cafe and barn. So what would that be modernized, or they would be intact, like urban countryside type of things? And the third thing is, I think you have covered that in terms of, because we are assuming 500 additional residents will be moving in there. So in terms of transport link, is that the only thing you are recommending to TfL, more frequent buses, or are you thinking something else on that? Thank you.
Is there anything you thinking on that, apart from extra buses?
New bus route.
A new bus route. Okay, John. Special circumstances.
Yeah. Right. Well, obviously you need quite important circumstances to override any harm to the green belt. And I think on this slide, we can have listed them all. Probably none of these individually would be enough, but the combination of them in total, we think is enough to override any harm to the green belt. And some of them are quite important. The amount of housing, the amount of affordable housing, the improvements to surrounding green belt, public routes through the site, and so on. We've looked at previous appeal decisions, and some of these very factors have been considered as very special circumstances by the inspectorate. So I think we're fairly confident that together they do amount to the weight of circumstances required to override greenbelt impacts. On the locally listed building, well, the proposal is to demolish an old extension or conservatory at the back of it and build a new single-story extension, and then refurbish the listed farmhouse and barns and make them into a cafe, basically, which will form a focal point for the residential development, but also be available to local residents nearby and visitors to Northallerton Farms. That's pretty much the sum of it. And the last point was, oh yes, the extra residents. Well, in terms of accommodating them, I think the increased frequency of buses is one factor. There's also, I think, as I mentioned, plans for a cycle route going past the site. There's a contribution to active travel measures, which will encourage more use of non-car ways of getting to the town centre as well. I think these were probably the main things.
Yes, go on.
Thank you. I just wanted to say just something else on the very special circumstances. John's report does mention some of the issues around Ealing's housing land supply figures and the background to why we've not been able to produce definitive figures in that regard. Previous cases have actually held that the lack of those figures is in itself, or it can be a very special circumstance. So that's one of the things that you would need to factor in deciding whether the circumstances outweigh the Greenbelt considerations. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't see any more indications for questions, so I will go into the, sorry, is that a question? So I'll go into the debate. So Councillor Kelly, Councillor Raza, and anyone else, keep your hands up, please. Pardon? Yes, sorry. Yeah.
That's okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, this, I think it's worth reminding ourselves, you know, what the definition of Greenbelt land is, especially designated area of countryside protected from most forms of development. But I think, you know, that ship has certainly sailed in that spot of land. It's not very green and hasn't really been protected for whatever reasons historically that happened. This is a really good opportunity. I think it's excellent housing provision, a great mixture. I trust it's viable financially because that's why they brought it forward. You know, good mixture of 2-3 family size houses. And it's an opportunity to integrate an existing established estate, which happens to be called Smith's Farm. There is a Smith's Farm estate there, very close to an award-winning recreational area in North Adderfields. I have sort of been given reassurances that Section 106 money is going to be available here, and I guess it's people who put on our councillor hats and make sure that that's done properly, because it's a real opportunity here to get the parking right, because hitherto we've got the parking quite wrong close by. Yes, you really, that's it. So in terms of integrating it with North Holt Village, I'd like to see that happen. We talked earlier about the dividing line of the A40, and in the last application, where the north is the north and that's like this, and the south is the south, and never the twain shall meet. But there is actually a good opportunity here to, the A40 is staying, yeah. So let's sort of make it livable to come out of Smith's Farm and go into the village. So I hope the Section 106 and all the other levies are well used, but I'm minded to grant this application. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Councillor Raza.
So having gone past this site quite frequently on the bus, it's been an eyesore, and let's face it, whatever we do with it was going to be an improvement in what we saw. My major concern with this, when I first heard about the Greenbelt bit, was that this was going to be yet another overdeveloped urban development. So I'm really actually quite pleased at the scheme that's before us today, because it's not like that, and it has actually taken things into account. Absolutely approve of using a heritage asset to maximize basically community use. I might even just throw in that perhaps it could be a public house, and might actually be more of a community hub that way for more of the time. And it's basically the family size housing that I think I find most attractive, because that's what we always look for. And I think my main concern is about the transport. So given that we're going to be having that discussion with TfL and trying to get things moving on that front, that's the only sort of weak spot that I kind of see in the scheme. I'm delighted with ecological reports. We don't see enough of ecological reports, so absolutely so pleased that it's more than just one paragraph. It's actually quite extensive. Although I would draw your attention to provide 2 insect houses in sheltered, warm locations, whereas like there are several. It's sort of left ambiguous as to how many bat boxes and bird boxes we can have. So could we please have more than 2 insect homes? But other than that, I really think it's quite a good scheme and it stands up. So I'm minded to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Raza. I think licensing might be a problem, but anyway, Councillor Gallant.
Chair, what I would say is the site, Chair, that the site visit is absolutely crucial, because on a map, you perhaps don't, it perhaps looks like Greenbelt, but when you actually visit the site and see that it is actually ultra brown field and it is really industrial use, I have slight concern about contamination, but that has certainly been answered. But when you consider 50% affordable, provision of family accommodation, 3 bedrooms, 11 homes with 3 bedrooms. I wish there were more with 3 bedrooms, but it's a good provision. And the transport links are not as bad as they look. It's about half a mile to Northolt Station, but it feels perhaps longer. So, but in any case, I will be minded to support and to vote for this application.
Councillor, thank you, Councillor Glenn. Councillor Ball.
Thank you, Chair. I'm unconvinced by the difference between this application and the refuse scheme at the end of last year. It still seems to me to be an appropriate development in the green belt. The scheme is similar in quantum. It's actually slightly larger in scale. I'm concerned that the very special circumstances for this don't seem to be all that special. It would seem to equally apply to almost any piece of brownfield land in Greenbelt if there's a residential application with some affordable, and that would be opening up the doors to, you know, really intensifying the use on a lot of bits of our Greenbelt. Yeah, so what seems to me to be more appropriate would be a much more limited scheme along the lines of the 2013 granted permission. So yes, you're getting rid of an eyesore, but you're replacing it with something that's of a similar scale rather than a much larger scale, because it's Greenbelt.
Right, thank you, Councillor Ball. Councillor Padder.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I had concern about this, about the shortfall of play space for the children and the parking, but both of those concerns been addressed. So I'm minded to support this application.
Thank you, Councillor Padder. Councillor Mahmood, and I think that's, is anyone else in? I'm sorry.
Thank you, Chair. That's pros and cons, and I'm still thinking about the special circumstances about Greenbelt and metropolitan open land. But other hand, I could see the benefits of this development, like net biodiversity gain, 150 more trees, and refurbishment of the rest, the cafe and barn, and refurbishment and more investment to improve Northolt tube station. So on the balance, I'm minded to support that application.
Thank you, Councillor Mahmood. Councillor Gordon, last one to indicate.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think this is a very good scheme. I think that the basis of it are the number of new homes, 220 homes, 50% affordable, and I think that's something to be applauded, because we do have a lot of proposals where developers squeeze in the 35, the bare minimum that they have to do to get through planning committee. So I would applaud the 50%, and that's really going to help improve what we're trying to do in the council in creating homes for our residents. I very much like the thoughts of working on the outhouse buildings in the barn, which on site visit seemed to be the only thing that was remotely attractive on site and could be a good potential for use. I have slight concerns about the loss of employment. I mean, we've had all the 3 applications tonight are mixing sites of employment and then building using housing. But I think you can sell cars pretty much anywhere, and I think lorry parks can be found elsewhere. So I think the absolute positives of creating 220 homes on a pretty grim site will be very much welcome. So I will support the application.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. I'm going to go to the vote because I see no more indications to enter the debate. Okay, right. All those in favour, please show. All those against? Any abstentions? Right, okay. Thank you. That application has been granted. Okay, we move on to the last application, which is the Quick Fit site in West Ealing. Jenny, you're going to present this. Settle down. Right, Jenny, would you like to present, please?
Good evening, Chair, councillors and everybody listening in. Today I'm presenting a proposal for the redevelopment of the Quick Fit site in West Ealing. The application seeks approval for the demolition of the existing buildings on the site and the construction of a co-living development with a commercial unit at the ground floor. The site is located within the Ealing Metropolitan Town Centre at its western end. You can see here the pictures on the right-hand side of the existing site and the buildings as they currently are. It is within an existing allocated development site in the current local plan, and it is also within the emerging new local plan. As you can see here, the development site only takes up half of the site. It was endeavoured to get the rest of the site within the application, but it wasn't able to be achieved. In terms of co-living, I think we're all getting a bit more familiar with what that actually is, but I think it's prudent to just quickly go over the main points of that. It's non-self-contained housing with an emphasis on communal living for single people or single occupation of each room. It's not an affordable housing product and therefore requires a financial contribution towards conventional affordable housing subject to viability testing. The application proposes a single tall building stepping up from 4 stories at the rear of the site to 9 stories along Broadway in the corner of Coldershall Road. The building will comprise the reprovision of the commercial space to be flexible to be used for retail, cafe and community uses at the ground floor, fronting onto Broadway. With 94 co-living units, which is sui generis use class, and the related communal areas arranged over the upper floors and intended for 94 residents. The proposed building is a rectangular shape with a curved frontage to the most prominent corner of the development facing towards the town centre. The building is served by a single core, which provides 2 lifts and 1 staircase to serve all floors to be completely accessible for all users. The development will be car-free with the existing vehicle access and parking removed. Pedestrian accesses will be created from Coldershaw Road for the residential and co-working space, and the commercial access will be from the corner of Broadway and Coldershaw Road in the most prominent location. A secondary employee-only commercial access will also be from Broadway. Disabled parking contributions of £9,000 are required, and the closest space that can be converted to a disabled parking bay is opposite the site on Coldershaw Road. You can see those here. This is the site on the right-hand side, and there are currently parking bays along this side, of which one at least can be converted. Servicing and waste collection will take place curbside on Coldershaw Road via a private collection service. There are 94 cycle parking spaces within a secure storage room at ground floor level and 6 visitor spaces to the front of the site on Broadway. And a laundry service is provided at ground floor level as well. The co-living residential units are arranged between levels 1 and 7. The standard room sizes ranges from 21.7 square meters to 26.4 square meters. Each room comprises its own separate living, sleeping, and kitchenette areas with a shower room and storage, and all rooms will have access to either a private balcony or a Juliet balcony, which again provides a high quality of accommodation. The rooms are generous in size compared to other recent applications for co-living developments, with roughly 2 to 3 square meters more space per room on average. The wheelchair accessible rooms are designed to M43 standard with access to a generous private balcony, and there are 10 in total. The top floor is dedicated to the shared facilities, and there are 3 terraces that these spaces open out onto. There is also a gym at 5th floor level, which has another terrace of 40 square meters. There's a total of 389.6 square meters of communal space within the proposal, and that is equivalent to 4.14 square meters per resident, which is also greater than other recent schemes by around about half a square meter. There is a total of 96 square meters of outdoor amenity space provided by the 4 terraces. Activation of the frontage of the ground floor is achieved by the commercial space at the front. You can see that is provided along here on Broadway, and has these large glazing panels, and the entrance here on the corner, which is a vast improvement on what is on the site at the moment, bringing the building line forward and activating that part of the Broadway. Also, along the first part of Coldershaw Road, are these windows here, which are to the co-working space for the residents, which again activates that ground floor part of the development. In terms of public consultation, we actually only received 4 representations. 5 are recorded on the system, but 1's a duplicate. Some of them I will talk about later. But some of the sort of more simple things are required by condition, like the management plan and the lack of concierge. There is a concierge provided at ground floor level in a reception to manage post and visitors and manage the co-living use. Lack of drying space. There's a laundry provided at ground floor level alongside a laundry service for the residents. Another point was the single aspect units. While this isn't ideal, they are expected in this type of development, and the units are assessed more as a room rather than a dwelling. And overall, the scheme has a good standard of accommodation, and this is looked at as a whole, including the communal areas within the development. Also, affordable housing. This is required by policy H16 of the London Plan, and this stipulates that an off-site payment in lieu is required to provide C3 housing elsewhere in the borough. In this case, a viability tested route was necessary, and initially the offer was for no affordable housing payment in lieu of affordable housing. Following this, we negotiated an offer of £500,000 towards affordable housing, and this was then reassessed externally by Gerald Eve and confirmed that this was the maximum possible offer at this stage. Therefore, we've required early and late stage reviews via the Section 106 legal agreements, and if something more can be offered at those stages, the council will look to take advantage of that. And returning to design and visual amenity and heritage impacts, here we have a map of the nearby heritage assets. The closest designated heritage asset is the Hanwell Cemetery. And on the right here, we have been provided with some drawings to show the visibility of that from within the cemetery. And these are taken in winter where there are no leaves on the trees. And so you can see that the impacts are relatively low, and in summer would be non-existent because they'd be almost completely screened by vegetation. Here we have some views from the Broadway with a before, where you can see the site is actually, it's very empty, and it sort of leaves a hole in the sort of visual continuity of the high street. And here's the development as proposed. It's spoken about as a gateway development, sort of marking the entrance to the town centre, so it's quite prominent in its location, but it seeks to form a gateway to sort of indicate the beginning of the town centre. On the right, we have views from Canberra Road, which is just the nearby perpendicular road to the site, where you can see the rear of the development and how it steps down towards the two-storey Victorian houses on Coldershaw Road. Impact on neighbouring amenity. Submitted with the application at daylight and sunlight and overshadowing studies, and those found that there were only minor or negligible impacts to daylight and sunlight, and most of these were to windows, to rooms that are not habitable, i.e. stairs, bathrooms, and in one case a bedroom, which is still considered not a habitable room because it's mostly used at nighttime. While the levels are impacted, and it might be noticeable, it's still within acceptable limits. And that's the same for the property across the road at 129C Broadway. In terms of the overshadowing studies, no properties are going to be unduly impacted by that. Looking at the height of the scheme, it is quite a step up compared to what is present on the site at the moment. But looking at the sort of emerging context along Broadway, the design responds well to that, where we've got developments further down the road going up to 15 stories, where they're already either built or under construction at the moment, or granted planning permission. The materials and design referencing local buildings, colours and materials taken from the locally listed buildings just nearby the site. Other matters, outdoor amenity space and urban greening factor is provided mostly at roof level, and the urban greening factor scored 0.41. The minimum is 0.4. So I think it's quite good on a site that is as restricted as this, that they've managed to get to that level. Noise, flood risk and fire safety conditions have been recommended and agreed by the applicants. Air quality, energy and sustainable development and transport. Again, conditions have been recommended and financial contributions have also been agreed within a section 106 and a section 278 agreement to be detailed out later in the process. In conclusion, I would like to recommend that the development, that the application is granted subject to the conditions in the section 106 agreements that are detailed in the committee report.
Thank you, Jenny. Right, so we've got some questions. Councillor Gordon, would you like to kick off? Others, keep your hands up, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions, not all related. First one was on the towards the end, you talk about the flood risk issue, and I read the Thames Water's contribution to the report. Just to flag up, maybe you can give some reassurance. That section of the Uxbridge Road is a notorious area for flooding.
Right.
There are repeated sewage flooding episodes on the houses opposite. So on the corner of Eccleston Road and Uxbridge Road, numbers 164, 162 and 166, Uxbridge Road, still not resolved. And it is an ongoing problem and it is grim. And that stretch of Uxbridge Road is closed more often than it's open in terms of works being done through flooding. So that's one. Two, I'm a bit intrigued by the amenity visuals we saw in the presentation coming from Hanwell Cemetery. There's a huge housing estate between the cemetery and the block, Michael Gaynor Close, plus some other residential properties. And there's been no mention of impact on those residences. That's two. Third question would be more about the section 106 and the figure of £500,000 for affordable housing. Can we have a bit more explanation where that's going to go? Is it affordable housing in the West Ealing area? Is it in the general pot for Ealing? And also on a slightly smaller amount is the £41,000 allocated to sports facility infrastructure in the local area. There is no sports facility infrastructure in the local area. There's Dean's Gardens and there's Drayton Green about half a mile away, the other side of the railway track. So will that go to West Ealing? Will it go to the neighbourhood, or is it going to go into a more central pot? Thank you.
Okay, hold on to those for a minute, Jenny. I'm going to bring in Councillor Coley next.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome the idea that the size of each unit has gone up to 21 to 26 meters squared. But then I was a little bit surprised when you said that these units actually include a kitchenette. I understand co-living is where they are sharing kitchens, but anyway, if it does include a kitchenette, I'm a little bit concerned that it is a self-contained, whereas you said we are not aiming to achieve self-contained units, but by the very fact that you introduce a kitchenette in each room, it effectively, in my opinion, is a self-contained unit, and you're circumventing the planning regulation of where a studio flat needs to be 37 meters squared. If you have a shower, 39 meters squared, if you have a bathroom. And therefore, I feel that these units are a little bit small, and including the kitchenette there, I'm not sure if it's an appropriate living environment. If you could just let me know that, is there any common kitchen facilities, or is it just the kitchenettes in the room?
Okay, Jenny, would you like to take those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions, please? And then we'll bring in the next round. Well, the next round is 2 other councillors at the moment.
Okay, starting off with Councillor Gordon's questions. The Thames Water comments are to be dealt with directly with Thames Water via condition, and those are dealt directly with Thames Water. The council has their own flood risk conditions as well, separately to that. And so it's how to explain it probably, but it's separately dealt with Thames Water, and they have to make applications to them and satisfy them that it's acceptable. Sorry, I don't think I've written down your second question.
It's about the amenity view and the views from the cemetery and being blocked by Michael Gaynor Close and probably the shops as well. Yeah. So
yeah,
that CGI, I think it was.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to get it back up.
Yeah, absolutely.
That one.
That one.
Oh, you're looking over, I think.
Yeah, so you're looking, so for this view here, you're looking from Hanwell Cemetery, and this view here, sorry, you're looking from the Kensington and Chelsea Cemetery to the north there towards the site. And these are supposed to show the existing buildings in the foreground, like in the space in between. The officer assessments were that is acceptable in this circumstance, and that the development is stepped to the rear so that those impacts are lessened. It's 4 stories at the back of the development, where the height of 9 stories is at the fronting onto the Broadway. Does that answer the question?
I think, yeah, because it wraps around behind Michael Gaynor Close, doesn't it? So that number 3 is where that picture's taken, I think. Looks, is it 3? It might be my eyesight.
3, and the bottom one is 2.
Yeah. So I think that's how you can get a view.
I think it would have been more value to have the view from where number 1 or even number 4 is, the development, because it's, frankly, it's people going to plant flowers in a cemetery. I'm less worried about their view. It's the hundreds of people who live along the Oxford Road.
So I can show you a view from further along. So, I mean, from the gates of the cemetery, I don't think it would be visible at all. It's over 150 meters away, and the road curves, and it's set back slightly. So I think the view from that part is negligible, and that's actually, now that I'm understanding the question a bit more, it's actually mentioned in the heritage impact assessment that those views are not impacted. The Section 106 agreement for the £500,000. So the initial viability assessment that was submitted offered nil, and that was then assessed by Gerald Eve as an independent assessment agency, because the council, can't do it themselves. And they agreed that was the maximum possible offer at that time. And then through negotiations and discussions after that point, trying to make the balance of the scheme, a little bit more acceptable, given that the units are good, the offer on site is good, the design is quite good in our views, but the nil offer was quite a negative part of the development. And so evidently this was actually discussed earlier on with a previous case officer, but that conversation had not carried over. So it was rediscussed a little bit later in the process than we probably would have liked. And they agreed to up their offer to £500,000. And then this was then reassessed by Gerald Eve, and then still agreed that it was the maximum possible offer. Does that answer that question? Yeah. Okay, and the 41,000 for sports and recreation, I actually don't know whether that goes into a central pot or towards just West Ealing. Alex, are you able to assist? Sorry.
So it essentially says in your heads of terms that it will be ring fence to the local area, and that can be defined. So I would expect it to be channeled to the locality, the West Ealing area, but we will have to define that, and we would do that via the wording in the section 106 agreement.
Just to be clear, it's right on the border of Hanwell and West Ealing, so it could be in either of those. So that is the last road in West Ealing. The next road is Hanwell, so it could be Elthorne Park, for instance, or something like that. Right, okay. Councillor Coley's question about the kitchenette and self-contained unit.
So it is typical for co-living units to have a small kitchenette. It's like a fridge with a single cooking hob on top, so that they can do a basic meal within their room. They don't have to go to the shared parts of the building every single meal that they have. But on this slide here, this shows the 8th floor where most of the communal amenities are shown. And this whole area here is dedicated to kitchens. There is enough kitchens to serve every member, in a shared sort of capacity. And there's a couple of more kitchens in this area, which is a communal lounge, but it has this sort of breakfast bar situation for social interaction and things like that. The use of the development is controlled by condition, but the actual use of the site is as a co-living is enabled by the shared spaces at the 8th floor level.
Okay, so it's kind of like beans on toast, but not a 3-course meal sort of thing. That's what we're talking here, I think.
Cup of tea and toast, things like that. Yeah,
right. Okay, so okay, let's go. Councillor Mahmood and Councillor Kelly.
Chair, just to quickly, one question and 2 clarification. The question is, if you consider my concern is lack of amenity space, and I just wanted to know what's the future of if children will be moving in this development and co-living. So
it won't be children living in because it's co-living for young.
Yeah, that's I just wanted to know if so there is no option for children to live in co-living development, one. And second is, in terms of consultation, I understand there is an objection from a West Ealing neighborhood, but have you consulted the community review panel as well? Number 2, and the
That's in the report, Councillor Mahmood.
Sorry,
that's in the report.
No, I can't find the community review panel.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the third is consultation, by looking at the number of the objection and the volume of the development. So it looks like myself and my colleagues just wanted to clarify the notices over there on the lamppost and people local residents notified there.
Councillor Kelly, sorry.
Thank you, Jenny. Just want to understand a bit more about the commercial space, the ground floor. It's sort of very motherhood and apple pie, all these commercial spaces at the bottom of flats now, new flats, but there's lots and lots of empty units in these flats. One in Greenford Broadway comes to mind, ones in North Acton Station come to mind. So what's the scope there to change the use? It strikes me that a couple of doors down is a surgery that could perhaps benefit from going into a fit for purpose area. We've got this application in front of us, but how much flexibility? It says flexibility, so how could you give me in totality what the flexibility might be?
Right. Okay. So, Councillor Mahmood's questions first. Thank you.
So just to address the lack of amenity space, there's no child yield in these developments. No, the age range is 18 to 25. Young professionals that are sort of in between, longer term housing, maybe buying their own property or, long term renting and leaving home. So no children intended within, and it wouldn't be allowed within, and it would be controlled within a management plan as well. And the management plan is conditioned for prior to occupation. Yeah. And in terms of the consultation, yes, the site notices definitely did go up. And they were there. We did have a few comments from the public, and so we can only assume that, you know, that the site notices were there, and you know, there's evidence that the site notices were there and that people could see them. You know, also in terms of the community review panel, this didn't go to a community review panel. It did go through pre-application a couple of times prior to submission, but no, it didn't go to the community review panel.
Just to pick up on those 2 points, there's no mandatory obligation for schemes to go to the design review panel or the community review panel, although it's strongly encouraged by officers to do so. And it can be a question of the timings as well in terms of the application process. So just wanted to clarify that. And then just to pick up on the site notices, we did double check the site notices, and we do keep records of where site notices for consultation purposes are displayed, and we also keep photographic records as well. So from the best of our knowledge, the notification was correctly carried out.
Okay, everyone's, sorry, Councillor Kelly's.
About the commercial space and the flexible use of that, we actually sought to clarify that, and that is within the briefing notes. So the stipulated use classes are use class EA and EB and F2B. So that's retail, sort of cafe and community use. So as it stands, those anything sort of within that bracket would be, you know, within the permission. Anything else I'd have to apply for a change of use.
Just on that, we did query this because usually the application proposals might apply for something which is as flexible as possible, so that other uses can go in without requiring a planning application. In fact, the before the briefing notes were circulated, the description implies something which was very restrictive. And what we've sought to do to resolve that is to try and concentrate on the uses that are being proposed and frame them in a way that is appropriate. It would, at this moment in time, imply that they will need to apply for other uses to go in, but it's not to suggest that they won't be suitable. It's just to ensure that in the first instance that the proposed uses that they're trying to seek in the ground floor are secured. If something changes over time, that may be subject to a further planning application.
Councillor Kelly, you want to come back?
If they wanted, if they reflected and thought we can't, they'd have to come for would they have to come to planning application if they wanted to change those units into homes?
Absolutely. If there
would they have to come here? Would it have to come here?
Planning department.
They would have to come back to the planning department, and then depending on the nature of the proposals, and we would need to obviously check whether it would be a requirement for this to come back to planning committee or could be a delegated decision. It will depend.
Thank you. I mean, I'm interested, you know, I want it to be viable. That's my point. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it, Councillor Kelly. Councillor Gallant with one of a last minute questions.
Very short one. Chair, this building, am I right in thinking that the footprint was actually bigger originally, but it had to be reduced because certain sites could not be acquired?
Mike, I'll just go back to the site allocation slide here. These diagrams on the left-hand side are the site allocation, and the site that we're talking about today is the sort of right hand, just over half of the site. So the boundary goes along the side of this orange rectangle here. The developer did try to negotiate with the other landowners to bring them into the development scheme, but initially, it wasn't possible to get them on board.
Right, okay, that's the end of the questions. Right, we're going to debate now. Councillor Ball, can you kick us off, please?
Yeah, so the Western Gateway into West Ealing is a bit grand perhaps, but I think it is, I think we can all accept it. It's essentially a town centre site because the way West Ealing passes into Hamwell, you know, there's really kind of no gap between them. So it's legitimately a site which can have, you know, slightly taller buildings. I think the main objections that we tend to, the main concerns that we tend to have about co-living schemes are the fact that it's not an affordable product, and you know that the quality of life for residents, that they're very small units, and it seems in this case we've got £500,000 contribution to affordable, and we've got slightly larger units than some of the schemes that we've already approved. So it does seem to me, and I listened to Councillor Coley's question, and certainly it's a concern if they're trying to sneak small studios in, but I'm reassured by the answer to that question and looking in the report, the various different communal facilities that are provided, including gym and co-living space and so on. There does seem to be genuinely quite a lot of communal use. So I'm minded to vote for this one.
Councillor Gallant, I haven't seen anyone else indicate yet, so.
Thank you, Chair. Tall buildings is a relative objection, and 9 stories would not appear to be tall, but in this area, I find it does conflict with the rest of the architecture. And if you talk about gateway, it looks as if that building is saying we're trying to get rid of the 2-story Victorian architecture that surrounds it. I have my concerns about shared living, not everywhere, but I have my concerns about shared living, which dictates socially what must happen in a particular site. And I'd rather see a mix of population. For those 2 reasons, I am minded to vote against this application.
I don't understand why it's not a mix of population.
Well, the building itself is a very restricted population inside the building. That's what I'm saying. Yes. In general sense, no, but the building itself is a restricted population.
Right. Okay. Councillor Martin.
So I do think there continues to be a little bit confusion about this co-living concept, which I think we've heard tonight. But personally, I have to say I am quite a fan. I think it does meet a particular housing need. I think it's a transitional product for younger people to move on to, more permanent housing later on. And I don't think you can confuse it with bedsits, to be honest, because I think the whole point of the co-living thing is you've got these shared facilities, and that obviously amplifies the space that you've got available. So, and I believe it's been designed to be flexible, so in future years, if those needs change, it can change as well. So I'm very much mindful to support it.
Councillor Kelly.
Sorry, I didn't realise it was up next. Yeah, I mean, it's in some ways it's a repeat of the issues that came up in Smith's Farm. It's all quite flabby around the Section 106 money, where but we to speak to the application, it's the design is fairly sympathetic, in fact much more sympathetic than a lot of stuff that has previously gone in West Ealing, quite close to it. They've it's quite sympathetic with the Art Deco job centre that's there. it's a pity that they haven't been able to acquire the site beside there, which to me, and I grew up nearby there, it never appeared to have any function. I have concerns about the commercial space, the actual viability of it, given the lots and lots of commercial space that appears to be unoccupied around. And obviously co-living is experimental. Having said all of this, I think it's, the co-living is something that we ought to be exploring. As co-living goes, I think it's a good application. I think it's good that we're actually looking for co-living space that isn't necessarily right on top of a station, that we are sort of bringing co-living into the community, because it's quite a traditional suburban, traditional location where people have lived for generations. So I actually quite like to see that mixture of young people where, intergenerational situation going on there. So yeah, and obviously it's a vast improvement on the existing site, although I accept its employment for certain people, and I guess people do use QuickFit, but I guess they'll find somewhere else to go. So I'm minded to grant the application.
Right, I see no more indications, so I'm going to the votes. Okay, right, all those in favour, please show. Keep your hands up for a minute. Right, all those against? One. Abstentions? Okay, that's it for tonight. Next meeting is 16th of August, bang in the middle of school holidays for all those that have school children. Right, okay, thank you very much. And thank you very much to the officers too.